On the vast, unpredictable waters of North America's Great Lakes, legends are born from triumph and tragedy. But no story is as haunting, as mysterious, or as sudden as that of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. This was no ordinary ship. She was a 729-foot monster of steel, an icon of American industrial might. For 17 years, she was the undisputed queen of the lakes, a colossal freighter so large and so strong that she earned the nickname the Titan. To the crews that worked the treacherous shipping lanes, she was considered, for all intents and purposes, unsinkable. But on the night of November 10, 1975, the unsinkable happened. In the heart of a storm of unimaginable fury, this Titan, along with her 29 crewmen, vanished from radar forever. There was no final Mayday call, no SOS, no panicked message breaking through the static. One moment, she was battling the waves. The next, she was gone, swallowed whole by the cold, dark water. How could a ship the size of a 70-story skyscraper, helmed by a veteran captain, disappear in a matter of minutes? To understand the mystery, we must go back 24 hours, to a time when the sky was clear and the water was as calm as glass. Our story begins on November 9, 1975, at the Burlington Northern Railroad dock in Superior, Wisconsin. The air was crisp with the chill of late autumn, but the work was routine. The Edmund Fitzgerald was taking on its cargo, over 26,000 tons of taconite pellets, small, marble-sized balls of processed iron or destined for the steel mills near Detroit. At her helm was the highly respected Captain Ernest McSorley. At 63, he was a man of the lakes with 44 years of experience. He was known for his skillful seamanship and quiet confidence. This trip was just another run in a long and distinguished career, one of the last he would make before a well-deserved retirement. By 2:15 p.m., the loading was complete. The massive mooring lines were cast off, and with a deep blast of her horn, the Fitzgerald steamed out into the vast expanse of Lake Superior. The forecast was favorable for the first part of the journey, and the crew of 29 settled in for the familiar trip across the lake they called Gitche Gumee. A short distance away, another freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, captained by Bernie Cooper, was following a similar route. The two captains, both seasoned veterans, spoke over the radio, aware of a storm system predicted for the following day. But for now, their world was one of calm water and clear skies. But far from the serene surface of the lake, a meteorological monster was being born. Over the plains of Kansas, a low-pressure system was rapidly intensifying. It was a perfect storm in the making, drawing immense energy from a clash of two powerful air masses: frigid, Arctic air from the north, and warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico. Meteorologists watched with growing concern as this system organized itself into a massive cyclone and began tracking northeast, directly towards the Great Lakes. They would soon give it a name whispered with dread by sailors: a November witch. These are not ordinary storms. They are inland hurricanes, capable of producing cyclone-force winds and waves that can rival those of the open ocean. By the morning of November 10th, the November witch had arrived. The National Weather Service, which had initially issued a gale warning, upgraded its forecast to a storm warning, predicting sustained winds of 50 knots. Captain McSorley and Captain Cooper, in communication, decided to alter their course. Instead of taking the usual southern route across the lake, they opted for a more northerly path, hoping the Canadian shore would provide some shelter from the building westerly winds. It was a sound decision, but it would lead them directly into the storm's deadliest quadrant. By 1 p.m., the storm hit with a fury that stunned even these veteran crews. Snow and sea spray combined to create a blinding whiteout, reducing visibility to near zero. Winds were soon screaming at over 75 knots well into hurricane force, and the waves began to build into terrifying, moving mountains of water first 20 feet, then 25 feet high. At 3:15 p.m., a transmission crackled across the radio on the bridge of the Anderson. It was Captain McSorley. His voice was characteristically calm, but the message was deeply troubling. He reported that the Fitzgerald had suffered damage. A fence rail on its deck was down, and two large vents used to ventilate the cargo hold had been lost or severely damaged. Most ominously, he reported that the ship had a list it was leaning to one side. This was a clear indication that the Fitzgerald was taking on water, but from where and how much was unknown. In these conditions, even a small, steady intake of water could slowly and silently compromise the ship's buoyancy, a slow-motion death sentence. Just under an hour later, at 4:10 p.m., a second, more alarming call came from the Fitzgerald. Captain McSorley reported that he had lost both of his surface scan radars. The powerful waves had likely smashed the rotating antennas, rendering them useless. In the heart of a hurricane-force blizzard, with zero visibility, the Fitzgerald was now sailing completely blind. McSorley made a direct plea to Captain Cooper on the Anderson, which was trailing about 10 miles behind. He asked if the Anderson could keep track of them on its radar and provide navigational guidance. The Titan of the Lakes, the pride of the American side, was now crippled and utterly dependent on the smaller ship behind it for survival. For the next 3 harrowing hours, Captain Cooper and his crew became the Fitzgerald's eyes. They tracked the wounded giant on their radar, calling out course corrections and providing warnings about its position relative to the treacherous Six Fathom Shoal, a shallow and rocky area near the entrance to the safety of Whitefish Bay. The waves grew even more monstrous. Cooper later reported that they were now so large, they would routinely wash completely over the deck of his own ship, a deck that stood 25 feet above the waterline. The Fitzgerald, already low in the water and taking on more with every wave, was being subjected to unimaginable stress. At 7:10 p.m., the Anderson's first mate contacted the Fitzgerald with a routine position update, warning them of another ship up ahead. He then asked the question that would become a focal point of the entire tragedy. "How are you doing with your problems?" The reply from Captain McSorley would be the last words anyone ever heard from the Edmund Fitzgerald. With a steady, unpanicked voice, he said, "We are holding our own." Was it a statement of stoic confidence, or a captain's final, brave attempt to shield others from his own growing fear? We will never know. 10 minutes after that final transmission, a massive snow squall, visible on the Anderson's radar, completely enveloped the Fitzgerald. When the squall passed minutes later, the crew of the Anderson looked for the Fitzgerald's lights, which should have been visible on the horizon. They saw the lights of other ships farther down the coast, but where the Fitzgerald should have been, there was only impenetrable darkness. The first mate checked the radar screen. The massive, solid blip that represented the 729-foot freighter was simply gone. Captain Cooper frantically tried to raise the Fitzgerald on the radio. "Fitzgerald? This is the Anderson. Do you read?" "Over." Only static answered. A growing dread filled the bridge of the Anderson. A ship that large couldn't just disappear. But it had. Captain Cooper immediately radioed the U.S. Coast Guard, but at first, they were hesitant to believe him. The idea of a ship of that size vanishing without a distress signal was almost inconceivable. But Cooper was adamant and a search was launched. The storm, however, was still raging, making any rescue attempt nearly impossible. In an act of incredible bravery, Captain Cooper turned the Anderson around and sailed back into the very heart of the storm to search for survivors, facing the same monstrous waves that had just claimed the Fitzgerald. The next morning, the search intensified. They found debris, 2 heavily damaged lifeboats, an inflatable raft, and scattered life preservers. Chillingly, none of them appeared to have been used. Whatever had happened, it happened so fast the crew had no time to even try to save themselves. Not one of the 29 men was ever found. For days later, an aircraft using a magnetic anomaly detector located a massive object on the lakebed, just 17 miles from the safety of Whitefish Bay. A submersible was sent down into the silent darkness. At a depth of 530 feet, it confirmed the worst. The Edmund Fitzgerald was found, broken cleanly in 2, its bow sitting upright in the mud, its stern section upside down nearby. The discovery of the wreck ended the search, but it opened up a new, enduring mystery. What brought the Titan down? The official Coast Guard investigation concluded that improperly secured cargo hatch covers had failed under the weight of the waves, allowing water to flood the hold. But many mariners, including Captain Cooper, fiercely disputed this. He was convinced the Fitzgerald had bottomed out on the Six Fathom Shoal, tearing a fatal gash in its hull. Yet another compelling theory points to one of the most terrifying phenomena of the open water: rogue waves. Specifically, a sequence known as the Three Sisters, where a series of 3 exceptionally large waves strike in rapid succession. The crew of the Anderson reported being hit by 2 such waves, which they said lifted the ship up as if it were a toy before the second wave crashed down over their entire vessel. They barely survived. It is theorized that the crippled Fitzgerald, already low in the water, was struck by all 3. The first 2 waves could have washed over its deck, putting immense stress on the hull, while the third, final wave could have lifted the ship's center high into the air, with its bow and stern unsupported, snapping its steel keel like a dry twig and sending it diving to the bottom in seconds. The loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald sent shockwaves through the maritime community and led to sweeping safety changes. New regulations required mandatory survival suits, stricter inspections, and the installation of advanced positioning systems on all freighters. But the tragedy's biggest legacy was cultural. In 1976, Canadian singer-songwriter Gordon Lightfoot, inspired by a news article, wrote and released The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The haunting, 6-minute ballad became a surprise international hit, turning a regional tragedy into an enduring folk legend. Every year on November 10th, the Mariners' Church in Detroit rings its bell 29 times, once for each man who never came home. Thanks to a timeless song, the story of the great ship, the fury of the storm, and the memory of the crew will never fade from our collective consciousness. As Lightfoot wrote, the legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they called Gitche Gumee.